All right, I'm not surprised, but overwhelmingly the comments, Notre Dame, that's who you guys want to hear about in these short sort of versions of the year season is over video. So we're going to start with Notre Dame. They, of course, got left out of the playoffs yesterday. I'm not surprised, and I think the committee did the right thing. Now, the shift that the Notre Dame fans are making in their argument away from Miami and towards Alabama, we'll address that in a second. But the committee ended up getting it right. They just ended up getting it right. You might not agree with it, and if you're a Notre Dame fan, you obviously don't agree with it. You've been crying and bitching and moaning for the better part of the last 24 hours, but you never should have been ranked ahead of Miami. That never should have happened. Now, that's on the playoff committee, and I'm going to make a whole separate video, on how screwed up the playoff committee is and the entire process is, because Notre Dame and their fans do have some legitimate points that they're making over the last 24 hours. Of course, all those points are overshadowed by their ridiculous crying, opting out of a bowl game, taking their ball and going home, that kind of deal. But they do have some points to make, and one of them is sort of the way that this happened. The end result, I think, is right. But how the playoff committee got there is a total and complete mess. And I'm going to make a separate video on the playoff committee, what I think about it and what should change. But let's just talk about Notre Dame getting left out. For the last 30 days, we've been hearing from Notre Dame fans, they're better than Miami. They beat Miami today. They should be in over Miami. This is why they're ranked ahead of Miami, game control matrix, and all these weird SP ratings that they would cherry pick from different sites to try to prove that it was right that they were ranked ahead of Miami, which it wasn't. They never should have been ranked ahead of Miami. Never a word about Alabama. Then all of a sudden, the final rankings get released yesterday. Miami jumps Notre Dame, and Notre Dame fans have switched their entire argument to we're better than Miami to we're better than Alabama. Let's start right here for a second. No team that is in the playoff before their conference championship game is going to get left out. It's just not going to happen. You might not like it. You might say, well, that's not fair. Why even play the game? They play the game because it's a reward for the regular season. All right. I know you don't understand this as a Notre Dame fan, but winning a conference championship means something to teams that are in a conference, especially teams like Alabama, like Georgia, who have been in a conference for almost 100 years. Almost 100 years, Alabama and Georgia have been in the SEC. That game means something to teams in the SEC. Now, fans look at it differently today than they did 2 years ago or 10 years ago. That's true. And it means something different now than it did 2 years ago or 10 years ago in terms of how it affects the postseason. Let's go back just 3 years. 2023. Georgia had won back-to-back national championships in 21 and 22. In 2023, they were 12-0, undefeated, ranked number one in the country. They went and played a 13th game. A 13th game that Notre Dame has spent the last 100-plus years purposely avoiding. Georgia lost that 13th game to Alabama. Georgia fell from first all the way out to sixth and didn't make the 4-team playoff. You know what I said? And you can go back and watch the video. Georgia should have won the game. It basically was a playoff game. All they had to do was win that one game and they were in. I didn't bitch and moan. I didn't cry about Alabama bias. I didn't spend the next 6 months of the offseason crying and blowing my nose because Georgia lost and got knocked out of the playoffs. It happens. The risk was worth the potential reward to me because Georgia's my favorite team. They've been in the SEC for almost 100 years, and winning the SEC championship means something. In a 12-team playoff, all of that has changed. What that game means has changed. What it means for all the conference championship games have changed. The conferences are trying, and again, Notre Dame fans are just never going to understand this because they've never been in a conference except for 1 year, 2020, and they, of course, lost the ACC championship game that year, so Notre Dame is winless all time in conference championship games. So, no wonder they don't want to join a conference. But anyway, I digress. In a 12-team playoff, the conferences are doing everything they can to save and preserve the conference championship games. And I don't think it's going to work. and I love the conference championship games. I don't think they're going to be around much longer. So this will be a pointless debate at a not too distant point in the future. But the way these conference championship games are handled right now, and the way they're going to continue to be handled as long as they're played the way they're played now, 1 versus 2 in each conference, in a 12, 14, 16 team playoff, any team in any conference that is in the playoffs before the conference championship game is played is going to remain in the playoffs whether they win or lose that conference championship game. That's just the way it is. Now, if you're a fan of another team in a conference and you get bumped out because of that, I will have more patience listening to that than I will a Notre Dame fan or Notre Dame crying about it, because this is their argument now. Notre Dame lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game. They should be out of the playoffs and Notre Dame should be in. Why? You didn't play a game on Saturday. In fact, you purposely avoid one. Whether it's right or wrong, any team that is in the college football playoff prior to the conference championship game being played and then plays in their conference championship game and loses is going to remain in the college football playoff, whether you like it or not. It happened to SMU last year. SMU was ranked 9th or 10th, whatever it was. They lost in the ACC championship game to Clemson. They stayed in the college football playoff. Alabama fans cried that they should have been in instead of SMU. South Carolina fans cried that they should have been in instead of SMU. Ole Miss fans cried that they should have been in instead of SMU. Illinois fans cried that they should have been in instead of SMU. Didn't matter. SMU was in the playoffs prior to that conference championship game. They lost and they remained in. The same thing happened to Alabama this past weekend. Then the Notre Dame fans said, well, why did BYU drop? BYU was not in the college football playoff prior to Saturday. Go back and look at the rankings. They were outside the top 10. Well, it's a 12-team playoff. 11 and 12 went to conference champions. You have to understand how the college football playoff works, right? 5 conference champions are guaranteed a spot. So when Tulane and James Madison were the 4th and the 5th highest ranked conference champions, they were guaranteed a spot. That's what knocked BYU out of the playoffs, not losing to Texas Tech in the conference championship game. That's not what knocked them out. Now, had they won the game, they would have been in because they would have taken Tulane's place as the 4th highest ranked conference champion, and then Tulane would have taken James Madison's place as the 5th ranked. But BYU didn't win. If you look at the rankings, and they're right here on the screen, the playoff committee ranked BYU 12th. Hell, they ranked Notre Dame 11th. So you have to understand the process here. There's 12 teams in the playoffs. BYU and Notre Dame are ranked 12 and 11. They didn't get in because who got in? The conference champions. The 4th and 5th highest ranked conference champions got those spots. So it's not an apples and apples comparison. When the Notre Dame fan complains, well, BYU lost their conference championship game and they got knocked out. They didn't get knocked out. They weren't in to start with. If you go back to the previous week's rankings, before the conference championship games were played, BYU was 11. 11 does not get you in. So they were not in the playoffs prior to the conference championship game. Alabama at number 9 was in the playoffs prior to the conference championship games. Notre Dame was in too prior to the conference championship games. The problem is this never should have happened. Notre Dame never should have been ahead of Miami. And this is where Notre Dame fans do have a legitimate gripe and an argument against the College Football Playoff Committee. The sort of rug pull argument that you're hearing Notre Dame fans make now, right? They pulled the rug out from under us. Yeah, they did. They were forced at the last minute to fix a mistake they had made 5 weeks ago. You never should have been ahead of Miami. You never should have been ahead of Miami. And had you not been ahead of Miami, you wouldn't have all this hope that you were going to make the playoffs. You kind of would have figured this out 3 or 4 weeks ago that you were going to be the odd man out unless Miami lost another game. I saw this coming a month away. I've been telling Notre Dame fans on every video and every live show and on Twitter every day for a month that unless Miami loses another game, they're not getting in. And that's when the Alabama fans were on and on about game control matrix and we'd be favored over Miami today. You were favored over Miami when you lost to them the first time. I mean, we don't decide things based on point spreads. We just don't. It's decided on the field. All this game control matrix and all these advanced metrics and stats that everybody wants to use and look at, those are great. And those have a place. When you're trying to differentiate between two teams that have the same record and similar resumes, like Notre Dame and Miami, but haven't played. If they haven't played each other, then yeah, you need to know their strength of schedule, their strength of record. What are their best wins? If they have losses, who'd they lose to? Game control matrix, common opponent winning percentage. All of those things have a place. The reason those things even exist to start with is to differentiate between two teams with the same record and similar resumes who have not played. Miami and Notre Dame played. So this is where Notre Dame fans have a legitimate gripe. The playoff committee did kind of screw them emotionally by leading them on. Now, I'm glad the playoff committee fixed their error on the last possible day, yesterday, and ended up moving Miami ahead of Notre Dame. Because if we ever get to a situation in college football where anything is more important than the result on the field, then we have completely lost college football as a legitimate sport. Nothing can matter more than the actual result on the field. And I'm not saying that records are the only thing that matter. They aren't. But when you've got two teams with the same record and they played each other, then yeah, head-to-head needs to be 99% of the equation. And the playoff committee screwed that up when they put the first list of rankings out 5 weeks ago, and it took them until the last minute to correct it. So I can understand Notre Dame fans being upset about the committee sort of pulling the okie doke on them at the end, but it was the right decision for the committee to make. And as much as you don't want to hear it, when it comes to the Alabama thing, as long as we have conference championship games in the same format that we have them now, this is the right thing to do. Otherwise, the teams are just not going to play in the conference championship game. If Alabama would have woke up Saturday morning and said, you know what, we're not playing in this game, then what? They would have been in the playoffs, just like Ole Miss and Texas A&M and Oregon and every other team in the top 10 that didn't play in a conference championship game. If you take a team that's in the playoffs, you put them in a conference championship game, they lose, and you then bump them out of the college football playoff, you will never see another conference championship game ever again. And that is what some people want. And we're probably going to get that at some point. There are going to be changes, I think, made to conference championship Saturday in the not too distant future, where you're going to see, instead of 1 versus 2, maybe you'll see 3 versus 6 and 4 versus 5. So the SEC will have 2 games on championship Saturday instead of 1. And instead of the 1 versus 2, you'll get sort of a play-in tournament where the 3 plays the 6 and the 4 plays the 5. Now, Notre Dame will still be sitting at home with their entire fist up their butt, not doing anything. And that's fine. That's going to give other teams an opportunity for an additional data point that Notre Dame's just not going to have because they refuse to play a conference championship game, because they refuse to join a conference. Do I think Notre Dame's a good team? Yeah. Do I think Notre Dame is one of the best 10 or 12 teams in the country? Yes, I do. They're definitely better than Tulane and James Madison. So if you want to lobby or argue or gripe about the playoff process in general, I agree with you. I've said for years, the group of five's got no business in a college football playoff. They should have their own. The group of five should have an entire separate playoff that consists just a group of 5 teams. The idea that we've only got 12 playoff teams and 2 of them are group of 5 teams is insanity. Absolute insanity. 15% of the teams are group of 5 teams. They're 3 touchdown underdogs. No one wants to watch those games. And just so we can feel like we're including the little guy, we're putting them in the playoff just to get their ass beat every year. That's ridiculous. And if we didn't have that, that would not only solve the Notre Dame man's problem, they'd be in, BYU would be in too. And again, we'll wrap this up. Comparing what happened to BYU and comparing what happened to Alabama is not the same thing. BYU was not in the playoffs before they played their conference championship game. They were 11th or 12th, whatever they were. They weren't in the top 10. So they were not in the playoffs prior to conference championship Saturday. For BYU, their conference championship game provided them a way to get into the playoffs, not a way to play themselves out. For Alabama, the conference championship game gave them an opportunity to play themselves out if Notre Dame fans had their way. If you want to take a team that's in the playoffs Saturday morning of conference championship day and then say, if you lose, you're out. If you do that, there will never be another conference championship game played. So it's not an apples to apples comparison to look at what happened to Alabama and what happened to BYU. And I'll end with this. But because the Notre Dame fans, they keep saying they're sick of hearing it and this doesn't have anything to do with it and blah, blah, blah. This is their schedule in 2026. Notre Dame handpicks their schedule. They play 3 road games. 3. At Purdue, at North Carolina, and at Syracuse. An absolute fucking joke of a schedule. Wisconsin is one of the worst Power 4 teams on the planet. The 3 road games, Purdue, North Carolina, and Syracuse, none of them can get bowl eligible. You play a service academy again, Navy. You play SMU. They were a group of 5 team 2 years ago. You play Stanford. They're about 5 minutes away from disbanding their football program. You play Boston College. They won 2 games this year. You have a 2-game. You play Miami and Southern Cal. And you get Miami at home, and Southern Cal says site to be determined. That's because they're still negotiating what they're going to do with that series. They're talking about playing it in Las Vegas. They're talking about playing it in September versus playing it in October. So we don't know what's going to happen there. 3 road games because you're not in a schedule. You handpick your schedule. It's an absolute joke. An absolute joke. And I don't know what this is floating around that came out yesterday, this memorandum of understanding that the Notre Dame athletic director claims they have signed with the College Football Playoff Committee. Have y'all even heard about this? Apparently, there's a memorandum of understanding that has been signed by Notre Dame and the Playoff Committee that if they finish in the top 13, they're guaranteed a playoff spot. See, Notre Dame fans wonder why people get so upset with them or why why does everybody quote unquote hate Notre Dame? It's shit like that. It's shit like that. Nobody else has that guarantee. You know what Notre Dame's argument is? Everybody in a conference has a guaranteed way to get into the playoffs. Why don't we? Because you're not in a conference. That's why. You want a guaranteed way to get into the playoffs? Join a conference and win it. You're guaranteed to get in. But no, they want their own special thing carved out. If we finish in the top 13, we want a guaranteed spot in the playoffs. I don't know why in the world the College Football Playoff Committee agreed to that or signed that. I've got to look more into that. How does the SEC feel about that? How does Vandy in Texas feel about that right now when they're ranked around 13 and not getting in? But Notre Dame has its own special clause. Why? Because they won a bunch of natties when we were watching black and white TVs and they were beating up on service academies for half their schedule. It's that kind of shit. That's why nobody likes Notre Dame. So, now you're not going to play in your bowl game. You're going to take your ball and go home. Well, if we can't play in the playoffs, we're not playing. Then don't play then. BYU would beat the fuck out of you anyway. Have a great day.